Guys, the worst has happened. The derailleur hanger is snapped, and I was coming down over there and it just hit the bump and just snapped. This part here is sheared off there, and there's just nothing that can be done. Nothing. So yeah, big problems today. Day 16, just north of Cortina, and the derailleur hanger has snapped. So that basically allows me to pedal the bike. So I had a bit of food, and then I just decided, let's remove the chain, break that, and then put the derailleur back to the frame, zip tie it so it's secure, because the actual derailleur itself is still intact. It's just the hanger that connects it to the frame that's broken, which is designed to do under pressure. So I did that, and now the bike could roll, but you can't use the pedals. So it's basically like one of those toddler's bikes where you use your feet to move it. So fortunately, I was actually at a high point between two towns. So I left Cortina going upwards, and I was at this point here, and it was pretty much downhill to the next town, or I could turn back. So I decided to just continue on because Cortina was a bit of a ghost town the day before, and I built up some good momentum on these gravel tracks, but it would just come to a stop as soon as it went flat or slightly uphill. But it was through the forest and it was beautiful scenery, so I just enjoyed that as best as I could. So I made it through the mountains towards Dobbiaco, and this area here is just so scenically beautiful. Everywhere kind of just looks like a painting, and I'm saying that coming from the Dolomite region. This is just a bit more of like rolling fields going up the mountains, and there's a lot more green here. And I approached Dobbiaco, and there was a bicycle rental shop by a bus station, and I went in. The guy said that their mechanics were in the town over, so I'd have to go and see them if I wanted anything done. So I set off to the next town, rolling the bike, coming to a standstill when it was flat. And the bike lane actually was closed for a big portion of it because they were doing some works there. So I had to push the bike across a field through tall grass. It was very heavy. But I managed to make it over there to the workshop. Unfortunately, it was still open. And I didn't expect to get, the new part here because they're not a Cannondale dealership. They don't, stock these bikes. So the best I could hope for was basically a single speed chain to be fixed at one gear. So it meant I could cycle on the flat road. If I had to go uphill, it would be too strenuous to actually do that, and going downhill, the pedals wouldn't do anything. So the guy was a bit skeptical at first. He didn't think it would work on this bike, but his own skills, impressed him. He was just like, oh, I didn't think I could get it that tight, that chain. So left that shop very happy. I paid 20 euros, I think, for the chain, and it meant I could actually cycle the bike. That was great news. So I just kind of continued on looking for a place to stop, and I could see the lights on at this pizza restaurant. I think it was called Pizza Hands or something. The waiter was extremely kind, extremely helpful. He basically went a bit out of his way to find me a seat in the back. It looked like they were completely full. But I settled down there, and I just, was in the warmth. And when you've been outside and the wind has been hitting your face and it's been cold, I could just feel it kind of throbbing. And I had a pizza Napoli, I think, with anchovies and capers, and then just kind of a beer. And I was just like, this is the best meal ever. It was just kind of even more amplified by the fact that I kind of had a small victory getting the single speed chain, and I was just kind of, safe, warm, and eating. So I booked a hotel up there. It was pretty expensive. It was around 90 euros, I think. But it had a bath, and, I just needed to completely relax. So I just headed there and just, absolutely zonked out. So I woke up that next morning feeling quite refreshed, and the sun was out. It was just kind of extremely beautiful being in that part of the country. So I just moseyed on to Dobbiaco to have a coffee and just think about what I wanted to do. And I decided pretty much just to continue on my journey and head west and hope to find a part in a bike shop. some beautiful scenery out there. Fortunately, it was a bit of a mixture between roads and, cycle lanes. And I had to be very careful not to snap the chain going up a hill that was too much for this single gear. And in my mind, I was just like, okay, I need a spare chain pretty much if this one snaps on me, and I could, refix a single one. So I continued on and I made towards Brunico. It's a pretty nice town, and I saw that there was 2 bike shops in there. And I headed to the first one, which was, I think it was called Sportler. And the guy was there talking to another customer. They were speaking in German, and I just waited till they were done. And the conversation gradually moved to my bike, just this massive thing there. And he's like, oh, what's the issue? And then I said, like, oh, the derailleur snapped, but I'm here to get a spare chain, just in case, my single speed one breaks. And he's like, let me take a look. And he jumps down on like all fours, and he's like looking really close at the derailleur. And he's like, I think I have this. And he goes down to the basement and comes up like 5 minutes later with this tiny like packet with the actual hanger in there. And it's not really until you go without something that you took for granted recently that you can really appreciate it. Actually being able to change gears on a bike and cycle. It makes all the difference, obviously. I think his name was Sonny at the Sportler store in Brunico, so big props to him.
The mosquitoes are just everywhere again. When it was 2 degrees, they were nowhere to be seen, but now they're back.
So I woke up that morning feeling quite fresh. The valley was completely kind of misted over, low-lying clouds in there. It was pretty cold, and I had a coffee and just kind of warmed up slightly. And I get to the end of one of the cycle paths, and there's a field that just keeps going, and there was a guy's bike just there, just resting against the fence, and I could see him just there smoking away, long hair, just kind of sat without like a care in the world, just watching in the distance. And in the distance, there were 2 cranes, a big construction site. And it just kind of reminded me of my situation. I was just like, I used to be working on these construction sites for years, and now I'm free, I'm doing this, and I'm watching kind of from the outside. And it just kind of gave me another bit of appreciation for what I was able to do and like the situation I was in. I was like, this is amazing. And the fact that the bike was fixed and everything, it was just a bit of a high point. And it got even better when I made it into Brixen, which was just an absolutely lovely city. Very old town. It used to be part of Austria, South Tyrol, now a region of Italy. But, it very much has the influence of those kind of countries, Germanic, Austrian. So I got a coffee and just some food, and I chilled out for a bit, and I was just thinking to myself, I need to come back here at some point because it is just such a lovely place. So continuing south, the next kind of big city would be Bolzano, which is the capital of this region, Trentino Alto-Adige, or South Tyrol. And the cycle lane brought me along the east side of it, but it continued all the way past the city and continued south. And when you enter big towns, like I've said before, it's very industrial, it's just very hectic. And the fact that I was already on a cycle path that could just bring me further south, I didn't want to really deviate off it because it was also raining at this point. So I made the decision to basically just kind of skip Bolzano, But before leaving the outskirts of the city, I stopped at the Sportler flagship store, which is the same brand where Sonny fixed my bike in Brunico. And I managed to get a spare derailleur hanger there because they didn't have one at the other shop. And that just kind of sealed the deal, you know, like I have one on the bike now and I also have a spare, so I should be good. Between Bolzano and Trento, there is a wonderful cycle path that brings you through the valley of just these hills and mountains on each side covered in mist. And, you know, the mist also sits low, like covering some of the towns and some of the buildings. And you could just see smokestacks as well from some of the industrial units that just kind of looks like it's creating that smog. And very scenic ride. And I was going down there and I stopped at this bridge that just looked like, it reminded me of Jurassic Park, the pterodactyl scene in those cages where it was completely foggy and they're walking through these cages and, you know, like the pterodactyl comes at them. Of course, you know, it's not really the same thing, but like that's what it reminded me of. And I was like, oh, I need to take some pictures here. It looks very cool. And another cyclist was coming up, you know, a lot lighter packed than me, probably having a lot better time with his knees and his body. And he was just asking me questions on, you know, the best routes moving north. He was called Andre, and he came from pretty much the toe of the boot. I think he might have also come from Sicily and got the ferry there and just came all the way up north. And he was heading back to his hometown in Germany. So I told him, you know, where I came from, and there was a good route up north, and took some pictures of him, and we parted ways. And I continued further south. So I was heading towards probably the second biggest city in this region called Trento. My cousin lives there with her friends. She goes to university, and she said I could just stay in the flat for a couple of days, just kind of like recoup. And there was a lot of rain coming as well, so to sit that out, which is very kind. So Trento is a lovely city. You know, it's got that kind of young buzz because there is a university there. You know, it has a good kind of feel about it. When there's a buzz like this, you know, it's a place you want to be. Unfortunately, it was raining most of the time I was here, but, you know, I just kind of went around the city and just took some photos, stopping in a very nice coffee bar that was pretty much decorated from a couple 100 years ago, and they probably never updated. But, you know, it's doing its job, so there's no need to change it.
So I've just left Trento, spent 2 days there. I stayed at my cousin's place. It was very nice city. But I felt like I was getting a bit of cabin fever, you know, staying still for too long. I find that a lot on this trip. I just want to keep moving, but then I also want to rest at times as well, you know, like spending a day or two in a city where I can just leave my bike and be able to walk around and not have to worry about it, which, you know, is a nice peace of mind feeling. But yeah, I feel good today. The body feels strong. Not like my last rest day when I went back on the bike and I just felt like absolute mush. The plan is to head to Lago di Garda today and potentially make it about halfway to Brescia. There's a couple of cities on the south of Lake Lago di Garda I want to see. I think Simeone, and just the ones that kind of line the bottom, which would be cool. Anyway, today is day 22 and we're about 770 kilometers in, probably a bit more, but it's looking good.
and I wanted to head to the south of Lago di Garda, which is a very touristy location. You know, it's very popular for kind of like bike tours and things like that. There's a lot of infrastructure down there for it. And it was a sunny day, you know, it was actually warming up quite nicely. So I got to the lake and, you know, it was very nice and relaxing, just kind of going along by the water, and then also some of the towns next to the coast.
It is day 23 today. We're just on the south side of Lago di Garda, and it is such a beautiful day. It's like the perfect weather for cycling. It's 16 degrees-ish, and the sun is just out, and there's like a cool breeze, but nothing to like impede cycling.
So I made a trip further into the lake towards Sirmione, which is kind of like a nice little town at the end that is kind of like these castle structures surrounding it, and very cool. I don't think bikes are allowed inside, so I just stopped outside. At least you can't ride the bike inside.
Guys, we made it to the top of this hill. The sunset in the background, it doesn't really come through on this exposure, but yeah, it's beautiful. A lot of insects today as well. This is the kind of temperature where they just start coming out, and it's so annoying. Had a tick on my my finger today. It seems to be doing all right, but I'll keep an eye on it just in case it was a bit sus. Yeah, it was a good day. Today is day 23, and I feel good about the coverage that we're doing so far. I should probably make some soup and then try and wash myself, because that is not nice.
So in the morning, you know, went down those mountain bike dirt tracks, just trying to find my way back to the road. And the next stop was Brescia, which is quite a big city. You know, it was very nice. I stopped in there for a pizza and just kind of chilled out for a bit. I went to a restaurant in this alleyway that was completely empty, and just opposite it, you know, a couple meters away, the restaurant next to me was completely full. But I was like, might as well just try out this pizza place, see what it's like. And it was very good, very nice pizza there. In Brescia, it has kind of like a scenic view spot on the top of a hill next to it, where I think there's a castle structure, you know, there's cannons, fortress walls and things. So I decided to struggle up the hill to get there. You know, I was like, this will be worth it. And it just kind of had a great kind of viewpoint looking out over the city, and it just showed how flat the place was. And you could see the hills in the distance, but over those hills, I could also see some grey clouds, so that wasn't a good forecast for the days to come. This next day was a bit of a struggle. This was, you know, pretty much rain the entire day. So I put on the full waterproofs, you know, like classic, and stopped in a cafe in the morning, and I scouted an Airbnb that I wanted to get to. Even though I was going to be wet the entire day, it made it better knowing I was going to have a dry bed for the night. So I just continued on cycling, and my body was very tired as well. So I was having these caffeine gels that I bought you know, for these situations. So I had 2 of those, and, you know, I was just powering through. And the Airbnb I booked was on this hill, you know, just kind of south of Lake Como, Lake Lecco. And it was a big slog getting up that hill. You know, it was raining still. I was pushing. I was in my full waterproof, so I was sweating. It was quite warm, and I was getting wet from the rain. And I could feel my phone like vibrating in my pocket because I had it on my chest to keep it waterproof in my jacket. And I managed to get it out, you know, slipping on the water. I answer, and it's the Airbnb host, and she said, you know, we've made a mistake. There's no spare room for tonight. You know, we're sorry. And I was just like, that's all I need to hear now, you know, struggling up the hill, basically 20 minutes away. I was like, oh, this is just terrible. And she said, but my mum has an Airbnb as well that she runs, and it's not very far from where I am. So head there, and she gave me the address. And I managed to make it there. There was this route that I had to get up, which was an insane incline. And it was cobbles as well, so pushing the bike up there was so painful. You know, shoulders cramping and everything, especially after a day cycling like that. But I managed to make it there, and they were both very nice and accommodating. Brought my bike inside, they were giving me all these towels to dry myself, and I just chilled out.
D'Aosta erano ritornati insieme, ti ricordi? Se sapevo le lasciavo tutta lei.
Grazie.
Una specie di hamburger vegetale.
Ostia, di chi è quello lì? L'ultimo, il tuo.
I soldi lì non
Ma
sarebbe,
scherziamo,
ma
dai,
dopo
Anna.
poi che ho visto.
So it's day 26 today. I'm in this kind of Airbnb on the top of a hill in a place called Calco. It's lightly raining today, so it is cyclable to go out. And I was thinking maybe to head to Lecco and kind of maybe head up to Bellagio. So I woke up the next day and the rain was still coming down lightly. And I was kind of umming and ahhing on whether to leave or not, because I had set off in rain like this in the past. But I just, you know, I was like, oh, what if it gets stronger? You know, I kind of need to rest up because I didn't want to get sick from being in the rain and getting cold for too long. So I decided to stay another night, and it was a good choice just to rest the body. So I set off towards Lecco the next day, you know, very misty going along the lake there. And I hadn't been to Lecco before. I'd been to Como, which was my next destination not too far away. It was just kind of nice seeing the mountains covered in that fog, and just the lake as well. Boing, 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 boing. But I had a coffee there and just continued on to Como, which is my destination. I had booked a hostel for 2 nights there because the rain was coming down very strong for these next 2 days. I've been to Como before, and I'd recommend it. It's a lovely place. You know, get the train from Milan. Como is quite small itself, but the idea is that you get the ferries to the beautiful spots on the lake. So I think I went to Bellagio previously, and then Varenna, which is just northeast of that, which I think they filmed some James Bond at, but I'm not too sure. But it's that kind of place. This time, however, you know, I was on the roads and I kind of didn't know how busy it was going to be. It was such big roads for such a small place. You know, Como isn't that big, but it is a very popular route, of course, and I think it's a route into Switzerland as well. So there were these huge roads, you know, it was very hectic and it was very draining. I didn't expect it to be like that. So as soon as I got to Como, I just headed into the center, had a nice coffee and an ice cream, and just kind of took my time to kind of relax and just kind of go around the sides taking photos and things. So I made it to the hostel, which is kind of on the northern outskirts, along the lake. And, you know, I stayed there for 2 nights. You know, it's pretty basic, but, you know, warm bed and a kitchen where I could cook some food and, you know, have some proper nutrition, get some protein in me, and just kind of, you know, repair the body. Thankfully, the rain had stopped and I was able to go on. You know, I could have gone in the rain, but it's just no fun. So I went out northwest and I made it to the Piedmont region. I was just in Lombardy, just continuing on cycling, and I passed through this kind of like forest which had all these old farm tools, which was it was very cool. They were all on display. You know, these old nails, old tractors, just all this equipment they used to use, and it's, you know, a nice use of it, you know, putting on display here. So the next destination that I had concreted in my head was Aosta. So Valle d'Aosta is the most northwestern region, and it's pretty much a route to the mountains towards France. So it's pretty much one valley all the way there. And Aosta is the, you know, biggest city there. So that was the next route. It was pretty much to go there and then turn back, you know, to cross it off. So for route setting, I pretty much just plug the destination I'm going to into my Garmin. It's an Edge Explorer. And this isn't the best way to do things because it calculates the route itself and it's not always optimal. The best way to do it is to put the effort into actually planning the route on like Strava or Komoot and then inputting it into the Garmin, and you know what you're going to be doing. But I was just a bit lazy and I'd let the Garmin do it for me. So in this instance, it decided to bring me over one of the hills or one of the mountains of the valley to get into the valley as opposed to going around it. And I was kind of like a quarter of the way up and I was just like, this makes no sense, but like, let's just do it anyway. And it was very tough, you know. Luckily the sun was shining, but you know, it was very difficult.
The hills are killing us today. Oh my God. There was no need to go over these hills, but the Garmin just insisted and I didn't check. And I think there's something coming behind me, but I can't quite see. It's big. Damn it.
And I was struggling my way up there. You know, it was very nice scenery. There were some very big lorries, you know, taking it slow down there. And I come up to this kind of water fountain, which looked very well established, you know, like old stone, just a very kind of regal setup with a spout and some water coming out. And this guy pulled up with like 9 huge glass bottles and he just starts filling them up. And just got to chatting, he's like, this is the best water in Italy. And I was like, that's good to know. And I changed my shirt because I was just drenched in sweat, and I filled up my bottles, and let me tell you, that water was just so crisp. It was so nice, just so cold. Yeah, it was delicious. And I continued struggling up, you know, replenished from this water source, and I passed this kind of big conference center that was appearing on the hill above me. It was a sanctuary, and they host like events and stuff there, and I stopped for a coffee. And I walked through it a bit, you know, a lot of it was closed at this time, but I walked through to the back garden and it just revealed this very nice garden with statues, plants and fountains, you know, very beautiful. At this point as well, the sun was dipping a bit lower, mist was forming and fog was coming out, and the sun was just at that golden hour where it was hitting the trees in such kind of like an orangey glow. It was just very beautiful. And I left there heading further uphill, and I came to kind of like I could see the crest of the hill and I could hear these cowbells, and slowly these cows were crossing this road with the sun lighting up the clouds behind it, you know, just this orange glow, and just this woman and her dog shouting at the cows getting them across. It was very cool.
So it is day 31 today. The sun is in full force this morning. Oh, I can see a river down there. It's beautiful. There's a big kind of layer of clouds covering the valleys this morning, and the sun seems to have just fully dispersed them. So it is going to be a warm day, it seems. And I put on this black jersey. My merino wool top, the short sleeve one, is just absolutely filthy. So today we're going to be heading to Aosta, finally, because yesterday that was the plan, but the Garmin just took me up over this mountain, which didn't make much sense at all. I don't really understand what the Garmin wants to do or aims to do, but it keeps me off the main roads, which is probably the reason why, but that is also why I like it. I hate going on those main roads with like the big lorries at 70 miles an hour, 80, it's too much. I think it's around 9-10 o'clock now maybe. After breakfast, packing up everything and just chilling for a bit. Yeah, let's give it a go. Buongiorno. So yeah, the back wheel has bulged, like the tire's broken, and the inner tube's bulging out the side. I think it was when I went over a chestnut, and the pressure of the chestnut exploding just caused the burst in the inner tube, and then that just bulged the tire. Dang little moped making that noise. But yeah, it's very annoying. I'm outside a bike shop now. It says it opens at 2, and I think it's probably 10 to 2 now, and the shutters are firmly down. So I left the bike shop, very happy, overcoming another issue, getting a new tire, and I also bought some bib shorts to wear on the bike. And the sun was still out, I still had a bit of daylight left, a couple hours. The sun was coming in strong, and it was just kind of coming over the hills. It just looked very beautiful. And going into Valle d'Aosta, it was just kind of, a nice kind of achievement. Damn, look at that leg. That's what a month of cycling in Italy gives you, apparently. And painful knees, painful legs, painful back, painful everything, almost. Yeah, we're about a couple hours away from Aosta. We're actually in the region, though, of Valle d'Aosta, which is perfect. So the hard part was coming today, where I had a lot of elevation to get to Aosta city. And my body was just not feeling it. It was just completely stiff. And I had new gels that I had one just to kind of give me the energy to get up there. And it didn't really do much for me. But I was in this car park, and I was getting ready to pretty much make, the start of this big stretch.
and my tire popped again. It was just like, oh, come on. Fortunately, it was just a tube, nothing actually wrong with the tire itself. So I was replacing that, and it was pretty residential, it looked quite like a friendly area. And I saw some people, walking by, and, I said hi, and I asked if they had like a track pump so I could get the proper pressure in the tire and actually know what it was. The woman runs back to her house, and her grandpa comes out, and he's like, I don't have a track pump, but I have a pump to pump my tires up. And it's funny here, the dialect of Italian here is very influenced by French. So there's a big mixture of the languages going on there. And I was having a very hard time understanding what he was saying, but managed to get there in the end. And we're in his garage, and it's pretty much very like a man cave. He's got this nice Alfa. He's got all these fishing rods. He's got these skis. He points to the wall, and he's got this like huge pneumatic pump with just a tube, no gauge. And I was just like, if I put that on my bike tire, it's going to explode even more than the blowout I had the other day. So I'm like, no, it's okay. Thank you, but I'll use the hand pump. It's fine. And he's just like, oh, sorry, I couldn't help you out. He's like, here's some fig jam that my wife made. And I was just like, it's just so wholesome. Just such a nice gesture that, he felt like he kind of like disappointed me in not being able to help. But like, just so kind, the people out there that you meet on the road. It's very cool. Stop for a roadside coffee. We're about an hour away from Aosta, which means we're 2 hours away. We already know what that means. Yeah, the flat in the morning was annoying again. It just seems like it's synonymous with riding a bike now. So yeah, just changing a flat every day. I'm gonna head to Aosta and then come back and probably stay in the town that I just came through. I made it to Aosta, and you could just see the mountains kind of backdropping the city, covered in snow, very beautiful scenery. And I just walked around, took some photos, and of course, had another coffee. So I spent an hour or two in Aosta itself, and then I decided to head back, covering the steps that I, made to get there. And I booked a hotel not far from Aosta because it was approaching nighttime, and I just wanted to rest up properly. So with Aosta ticked off, I was now heading further south back into the Piedmont region, and now heading towards the capital city of that region, Turin, or Torino in Italian. And I made it to the outskirts. It was getting quite late. It was around 4:30, and I decided, I'll go into the town tomorrow. So I was in this cafe, just kind of, looking at my phone, just looking at some green spots, looking for some forest and things. And another cyclist pulls up, and he grabs a coffee from the window, and he sees my bike, and we just start chatting, and he sits down. Very nice guy, Claudio. He was retired, and his main hobby was cycling. And his Italian was very easy to understand for some reason for me. Like, he was speaking at such kind of like a good pace for me to understand. So we had a nice conversation, and he was very interested in, the cycle I was doing around the whole country. And he was just like, where do you sleep and all this? And, I was telling him about the camping. He's like, are you camping tonight? And I was just like, yeah, probably. I'm just looking for a spot to go to. And he's like, my son's just moved out of my place. He's like, there's a spare room. Do you want to, have that for tonight? And I was just like, absolutely, never turned down a room. And he lived with his 92-year-old mother, and his son had just moved out because his son had this family and recently had children, and he needed a bigger place. And, he was so nice, so accommodating. So was his mother, who at 92, let me tell you, going very strong, very strong woman. And He offered to wash my clothes. You know, he made some nice food, some very heavy, carb-heavy stuff for the cycling. And yeah, just a lot of kindness again.
Eventi analoghi in varie zone europee. Tra i disastri meteorologici più mortali dal 2004, secondo il World Weather Attribution, nell'Europa nel 2022 e nel 2023.
He also had this very cute border collie dog, and saying goodbye, the dog was just kind of like, you know, jumping all over the place. Yeah, very sweet. And I set off towards Turin that morning. And Turin is a beautiful city, you know, very big, and I need to go back and explore it a bit more. It's a bit more off the path of, you know, kind of like the regular major cities that people go see, like Milan, Florence, Rome. It's quite far northwest, but definitely worth the trip in my opinion. Being on the bike, I didn't really explore as much as I wished to. You know, having that cabin fever mindset and stuff. So I need to go back. But yeah, a lot of museums, just a lot to see. And the most I did was basically just cycle around the center, get a coffee, and then get some food for the road as well. So I left south and it was pretty industrial again, you know, very big city, the train tracks, you know, the rail, everything. And I managed to make it to the green fields, approaching kind of southwest towards the mountains that border France in this region. And it was a nice feeling at this point as well, because I covered the most northern points that I was going to go to, and I was now just heading south, so kind of like the direction was clear to me. And I kind of veered off a bit to the southwest and I made it to Torre Pellice, which is kind of at the base of these mountains that go into France. And very nice small town there. I had a coffee and just kind of chilled out for a bit before heading further south, this time going a bit more east, and the Garmin doing its thing again, setting me over a very big hill. But, you know, since my last experience going over the hill was nice, you know, discovering things that I wouldn't have seen otherwise, I decided to just go with it. And awarded again, there was this lovely small village called Vernasca at the bottom. Really kind of old architecture, had a coffee, some pastries, and it was quite touristy, this place. You know, there's a lot of people walking around, a lot of sights to see again, but on a smaller scale. And now I was heading further southeast towards Cuneo, and I stopped in this small town. I was feeling a bit cold at this point. I figured that I was maybe getting a bit ill. You know, I just didn't feel quite right, and I was just like lying down in the sun in the center of a small town on a bench. And this cyclist just waves out to me, and he was just there with like his half pint and, you know, like a espresso. He just calls over to me and he's just like, come over here. And he buys me, you know, the same again, half pint, and he buys himself another espresso and one for me. And he's like, this is exactly what you need to wake up. And I was like, sure. We had a nice chat, and then we basically just head our separate ways. Of course, the beer didn't do me any good. The coffee woke me up slightly, and I was just continuing on as it got a bit dark, and I've just found a place to camp. So I made it to Cuneo over the next day or two, and, you know, Cuneo again is a smaller city than like Turin. And it's definitely not a place that people will go out of their way to go to. But it is, it's pretty nice. And I stopped there for a coffee and some food again before leaving, heading southeast towards Liguria, which would be the next region. And there was this lovely sunset behind me as I was heading out east, setting over Cuneo. And I had to stop a couple of times just to take it in because I couldn't see otherwise. And it was just this lovely orange glow. And you could just see these birds kind of flying on the horizon, just silhouetted against it. So it's day 37 today, and I was at Cuneo yesterday, and now I'm going to be heading to Liguria. Time is actually passing quite quickly. I think I have another month, so it's 4th of November today. I have to be back in the UK probably like mid-December. I think it was like the 12th of December I had to fly back to not overstay my 90-day limit. My stomach feels a bit funny. Not like I'm going to be sick, but just like I know I'm kind of like unwell. These are the tougher parts of the trip, by not feeling well and then having to continue on anyway.
Ok? Prego.
It was around this time when I woke up that morning and that day that I was feeling a bit conflicted. I had a bit of like a dilemma in my head in terms of how I was spending my time. When you had the idea, or at least I had the idea, when I was cycling Italy, you have all these expectations of what it's going to be like. And, making some good distance on the bike, passing all these lovely vineyards, having a nice coffee, having some wine, speaking to the locals, and just kind of having a great time all round, covering all those bases. But when you want to make progress, you can't really have all that time to, spend around with the locals and all that kind of stuff. It's a very tough balance. And when you want it all, it's hard to settle for a bit of both. So I was just like, okay, I just need to take it slower at this point. I've covered quite a lot of distance by this point. I'm pretty confident in my ability to cover the entire country. So let me just relax things a bit and just, take things in a bit more. I got cream of asparagus soup, crema di asparagi, and it was very watery. I may have put too much water in, so I put some oats in instead. It's quite nice. I guess if you like oats, I do. Anyway, slow day today. Only did 38 kilometers. Yeah, this day was a bit of a rethink. Taking some time. And, Legs have been battered, body's been battered over the last few days. Yesterday I was in an Airbnb, which is lovely. Had a nice bath. I love baths, especially after physical activity. Very wet morning after a beautiful sunset last night. I think I'm going to make a stop in a coffee shop first, just have a bit of a break. So I entered this town called alto-adige, and I was passing all of these kind of like ruined buildings, which, obviously old factories, industrial units in ruin, and they had terrace fencing around them. Obviously work was going to be ongoing at some point, but it just looked like the town was in complete ruin. And I just continued cycling on, and I just see a plaque outside a very kind of like simple but like elegant restaurant, and it's just like Michelin star. And I was just like, what? It's just so contrasted to what I just passed, the ruined buildings, and then there's just this Michelin star restaurant. But the town was coming together at that point, and it's a pretty small place, and I was just like, I'm pretty hungry. So I went in there, and I was getting the full treatment. The guy came over with this tray of truffle, waving it in my face. He's like, breathe this in, prepare the palate, and bring me over all these kind of like taste of things and stuff. And I ordered this raviolini, small bits of ravioli, and it was on this very beautiful kind of gilded plate. And at the end of all that, it was such great kind of presentation. The food was amazing, and it was only 26 euros, including tip. That is insane. That is such good value here. And it was just kind of like tucked away. It was a busy place, so everyone obviously knew about it in the local area. But yeah, it was a bit nondescript from the outside, and then you come in, you're like, whoa. And that raviolini pretty much fueled me to get over the hills of Liguria, which were pretty steep, to be honest. You get over the hills, and then you're on that road that passes along the coastline that goes southwest towards France, and then also continues east to mainland Italy. And I entered Savona, which I approached the coast first, and it was just a beautifully sunny kind of evening. Made it to the sea. So we're on the west coast. This is the first time I'm seeing the sea here on the west. And yeah, the last time I saw the sea was Aquileia on the east on like day 8, I want to say, or day 7. Very early on, almost 30 days ago now. That's pretty wild. So we're here in Savona, and I'm gonna head out probably east and head to Genova, and further east to Liguria. A lot of Liguria is just going to be along the coastline. It's day 38 today, and we're going pretty strong. The bike's holding up. I got the tyres on quite a low pressure, I think. Probably around 50, I'm not sure. But we haven't run into any problems with them so far, and I'm hoping that I don't run into any. So Savona was a lovely place, actually. It's quite a big city. You could see a lot of kind of condominiums on the seafront. There's a lot of space there, and I went into the city. I came upon this square that just had like these carnival rides, a twisty merry-go-round. These kids were playing football, and it had a bit of a nostalgic vibe for me. I'd never been here before, but it gave you that like, comforting feeling, like, this is a nice place to be. It's a nice place to have a family. And I stopped for some ice cream, and I came through an alleyway to an opening where, it was kind of like an intersection of like 4 or 5 alleys, and there was this music that was playing coming out this jazz shop, and the guy was just sat outside there with a flat cap on, looking very 80s jazz. And, just chilling. There was a bar there, and there was these seats, and it was just kind of like a nice kind of vibrant spot tucked away in the alleys. And I was like, I'm just going to chill here for a bit. It's, a very nice kind of feeling. So I woke up to a nice sunny morning, packed up the bike and continued along the coast going northeast. some beautiful scenes of like colored houses lining the seafront, you know, a bit of resemblance from Cinque Terre, which is where that's most famous. You know, it's the most probably famous tourist destination on this coast. And you could just see the houses, you know, that kind of style there. But it was getting a lot more industrial. You could see like more port activities, more heavy goods vehicles. The roads were getting, you know, bigger and things like that as I approached Genova. And I didn't really want to stop in Genova because it was such a big city, and I wasn't in the mindset to explore another big city. And as I passed through the roads there along the coastline, you know, next to the port and things, that just kind of cemented that thought. But yeah, let me just tell you, I do not recommend cycling in Genova if you can avoid it, especially near the port area. It's got some bike lanes, but like it's just very confusing and just very busy and just not a good time, to be honest. So I just pressed on through Genova. It took a lot longer than I thought it would, and I came out the other side and it was pretty much turning dark. You know, it was almost nighttime, and I was getting pretty desperate for the toilet at this point. I made it to the top of this hill where there was this restaurant, and I park my bike up, I lock it, and this old guy comes up to me, and he just starts talking to me. You know, he was very sweet, and I was just like, oh, I can't rush off. Like, I'll speak to him for a bit. I was telling him, you know, I'm heading to Portofino tomorrow. And he goes, you know, why would you want to go there? You know, that's pretty much just where rich people go to eat expensive food and buy expensive clothes. And I was just like, well, it must be good then. And he was like, and said our goodbyes, and I went into the restaurant. And at this point, I was like, I've left it a bit late to find a campsite. So I started looking for accommodation, and I also left it a bit late to find accommodation. So I just had the food and continued on, you know, a lot less stressed now that I was able to go to the toilet. And I managed to find probably the worst camping spot on the trip so far.